Hello, everyone. I'm so excited today to have a dear colleague of mine, Juan Villegas from Your Yoga Flow. Now, before we introduce you, I want to give you some context, Juan, of why I wanted to have you here to chat with us. So, when my daughter was little, she had a really hard time regulating herself, being in her own mind and body and space. And so I used to try and talk to her about breathing, right? And using breath as a way to regulate. I realized, couldn't breathe. She couldn't breathe. So her nose was stuffed and, all this was going on. She had a lot of sinus things. Through her dentist, she said, there's some things going on, the way that her face is structured. And so she had some surgeries. So this got me kind of down this pathway of open mouth breathing, right? And the sleep deprivation and all this kind of thing. And then also in this book that I adore, I'm sure you're familiar with, right? James Nestor, Breath. It also talks about how we experimented with putting, things up his nose. And my husband then, I showed this to him. I talked to him about his breathing issues and his snoring. So he also had some surgeries. So I'm saying this because I became a little obsessed about the mechanics of breathing and how important it is for our bodies. And then I found you and your course called The Anatomy of Breath at Your Yoga Flow. And I just think it's such important information for us to, first of all, it got me thinking about how can we teach young children in a creative way about breathing techniques. And also as they get older, right? The upper elementary and our teens are more interested in the mechanics, the science behind it, which I really found so important. So I'd love to hear from you. Who are you, right? Who are you in the world? What do you teach? And I'd love to hear what sparked you on this trail of researching about mechanics of breathing. So first of all, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Giselle. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I had you on my podcast, so I'm really happy to now we are sharing the other way around. Now I am being interviewed by you, so I'm really appreciative of that and happy to see you again.
Yeah.
So yeah, my name is Juan, and I am originally from Colombia. I lived in Canada for 20 years. And I'm now back in Colombia, but I would say that when I was growing up, I was not exposed to movement. I was not exposed to breathing, or in yoga, it's called pranayama, breathing techniques. And I think moving to Canada when I was 18 years old, it was very eye-opening for me because it was the place where I had just finished high school, and then I was like, okay, now I am in Canada. I was supposed to be there only for like 8 months. I was gonna study English. But then I was like, okay, I am by myself. I finished high school. I can basically do whatever I want. And I've always been really interested in art. And and I went to take some classes in an art school in Canada, and I came across a course called Movement in the Visual Arts. And this course was taught by two teachers. One was a dancer, and the other one was a visual artist. And they both came from Laban. Laban is kind of like a somatic movement system. And that was my first introduction basically to dance in general. And then I really loved it. I loved being able to move my body, to embrace the idea of being kinesthetic, because nobody had taught me that we even had different ways of learning. My schooling in Colombia was very targeted toward math and engineering and that kind of stuff. So it was really lovely to be able to be in another country and to be free to kind of like express myself and to discover all these other ways of expression, like movement. So I became friends with the teacher, with the dancer, and she introduced me to her classes, and I started dancing, and I got really into dancing. And then I went to art school, and in art school I continued to pursue movement a little bit. But then it wasn't until I graduated, I was still in Canada. It wasn't until I graduated that I decided to pursue movement further, and I enrolled in a dance conservatory, and I continued to dance, and I did 3 years of full-time professional dancing. And that was basically the beginning of all. Then I started to teach yoga, then I started to teach Pilates, but then and then you would hear little cues from your teachers in dance, cues that related to your rib cage, cues that related to lengthening through the spine in order to create more space in the torso. And that got me thinking that there were a lot of movement educators out there with essays and articles and books that related to breathing and movement. Now, when I was invited to start teaching teachers in yoga teacher trainings, and then I felt that I had to go deeper and studying many concepts within yoga, but mostly anatomy, I discovered also teachers in the yoga community that would also use a lot of breath and movement. So I started with Leslie Kaminoff and Amy Matthews. They wrote a book called Yoga Anatomy. And I think that was really the beginning of my interest into being more focused in breath in general. Because then I was like, oh, yeah, breath is something that we take it for granted because it happens within us naturally. And then yet when I practice all these techniques, it feels like, I don't know, it just feels like something opens up. And then I was like, I'm sure there is something here that all these teachers that I'm learning with, they have discovered that I also want to discover for myself. So
what I love about this
that was
one is I love the story about that. I didn't know that we're both from Vancouver, so we have that, connection there. And I'm assuming you went to maybe Emily Carr, maybe.
I did. Yeah.
Okay, great. So
Yeah.
I love that you're bringing this curiosity to learning about the breath from such a creative, artistic point of view. As a dancer, as a creative artist, as a professional creative artist, you're bringing that understanding, the mechanics of breathing. I just think that's so fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you look at anatomy books, or if you and maybe talking with friends from high school that went to med school, like when we talk about the way that anatomy is taught in more scientific areas, like in med school, or when you open an anatomy book that is targeted to scientists, breath is not talked from the point of view of, if you breathe, you can get all these benefits. It's basically just the perspective in medical books is basically to talk about the mechanics of breathing and the muscles that helps us breathe and the bones around the rib cage and all that kind of stuff. But nobody, when they teach you that, nobody is telling you, by the way, when you start to work and emphasize and bring awareness to your breathing, you're going to feel lighter, you're going to be more focused, you are going to be more receptive, the rest of the body is also maybe going to feel a little bit more opened. Because that's, in a way, that's not the purpose of anatomy. Anatomy is the study of the body, from a very mechanical point of view, not from a somatic point of view or from a mindfulness point of view. Then you have to go to more specific fields to learn now how breath impacts ourselves. So that is what I loved about yoga and dance, is that I could study anatomy, but then I could study anatomy from the perspective of movement, and from these teachers that were not necessarily doctors or anatomists. They were basically interested in researching how breath influences the mind and the body, and how it can be beneficial for ourselves. So I would say that that was the beginning of my interest in breath. And another thing that I really loved was that when I studied with Leslie Kaminov, he talked a lot about Krishnamacharya. And for those that are not familiar with yoga, Krishnamacharya is known as one of the fathers of yoga. And he was the teacher of Iyengar and Pattabhi Joy, who created Ashtanga yoga. And his son is also prominent in the world of yoga therapy. So Krishnamacharya's way of teaching was very much about the individual. I am with one person, like private lessons or private classes or private therapy sessions. And then we're going to kind of like holistically work on yourself, because, you know, we need to figure out what it is that you need to heal from, and using yoga as a way of healing. And he used a lot of breathing techniques as a way to help the healing of the specific person, not just movement, or he used everything that he knew: Ayurveda, breathing, or pranayama, movement, which is the asanas in yoga. So it was more of a holistic approach. So I love that when I started learning about breathing from this perspective, it just went back so long to the beginning of the 20th century,
Right.
and that there were basically teachers bringing that from other places like India, in which probably that knowledge had been there for thousands of years.
Right.
So it's almost like, okay, there is this knowledge that has been in place for thousands of years. How is that not interesting and really cool to everyone else? You know, like,
Right.
because when we think about anatomy, anatomists were opening bodies for scientific purposes. I don't know, in not 3,000 years ago. Like, that's more of a recent, I guess the Western medicine, Western science is more recent than whatever was going on in India, for instance. So to me, I feel that the older, the more maybe obscure in a way that maybe not a lot of people knew about ways of doing something, to me sounded more interesting than the more cut and dry way of the Western methodologies. I mean, to me, that's just to me what I felt that it was very interesting and curious about. And these people have been doing it longer because they've been researching breathing and movement and meditation and putting all that together for thousands of years. And they were not separating things like the anatomists of the West, that, you know, they would separate the body, they would take the muscles and the fascia and see it all as different pieces of the puzzle instead of seeing it as all being a holistic entity. I felt that was cooler for
Right.
my learning
Right.
and my interest.
Right. And I think what you're saying there is that, for example, right now, you know, a lot of our community are teachers, right? And they're finding that teaching breathing techniques is really, honestly, the easiest and best way to begin a yoga mindfulness practice in the classroom, because it's secular. It doesn't take a lot of time, right? You don't need props. It doesn't cost any money. You don't have to have a big space, right? It's something that all children can do, and adults. And also, I think for a lot of adults, they've seen the impact for them, even in a yoga class or wherever, they've seen the impact of, or meditate in the morning, whatever it may be, that that's it's so much more accessible. So by you saying, there's this lineage. So knowing that by you introducing breathing in a classroom, right, and it's secular and all those things, this is based in ancient wisdom from thousands of years ago. This is what it's like to regulate your body, right? And to, like you talked about, even for the older children who want to understand why it's important to breathe well, they look to not only understanding the mechanics, which I love about your course, but also, so what, right? And who of their people that they watch, who of the famous people. So we've got like dancers or musicians or sports, they're famous basketballers and baseballers, everybody's practicing breathing before, take a deep breath before you shoot a basket, for example, right? So
Totally.
This is what I love about your work, is that you're making this accessible for everybody, as well as children, to see, my goodness, even in COVID, right? COVID now, isn't that ironic? It's a disease of your lungs and of your breath. So it's almost like the mother, the universe is telling us, right? I don't know, making this up, right? But the universe is saying, like, time to slow down, take a pause, get into your body, turn inward, and take a deep breath.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. And I love what you said about these techniques not just being useful for, let's say, movement, but also for sports, which is a different kind of movement, but sports or music or singing or everything, even sitting down in a computer,
right,
and taking, as you said, quick 5 minutes or 3 minutes of mindful breathing, specific exercise of mindful breathing is so important, not just for the body, but also for the mind, and for focusing and for being able to continue with your day and getting things done.
Yeah. And one of the things I loved about your course is that one of the things you suggested is to notice in your body. So do the exercise of like sitting at your desk or your computer, whatever, hunch yourself over and bring yourself so just to be able to explore, for children to explore what that feels like in their body. So like you said, with yoga teachers, they give us the prompt to straighten our spine, but why? What difference does that make, right? And to have children to explore. So like, I know my kid on her screen, right? She's all hunched over, but if she can feel that, open her chest and open her shoulders, the difference that makes, right? And so I'd love to hear from you, sort of from doing all your research and what you've seen from your participants in your yoga flow. What would you say are kind of like, what are your top tips of how to breathe well, or so what are the benefits that you're noticing or you talk about most?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I already mentioned, which was that the feeling that it gives you once you start to become mindful about a breathing technique, and once you do it, is and I think you talked about the exploring part of this whole process, is that and also going back to what I talked about, books and anatomy books, is that you learn from a book, but you're not experiencing it within yourself. So there is not that exploration part of the process that you have once you have these techniques, or once a teacher invites you to try it for yourself. I think that's when we feel it, instead of reading it and seeing it of, oh, okay, these are my lungs, this is my diaphragm, this is my rib cage. How do you feel your diaphragm? How do you feel your lungs? How do you feel your rib cage? So that's I would say that that's one of the top benefits, is to be able to have a closer relationship with your own body and with awareness, which eventually that can go deeper, and then we can start to get into concentration and focus and meditation, if you're someone who likes to meditate. So So I would say that that's one of the benefits. And then also patterns of breathing. So because we know that breath is there, we take it for granted. A lot of us don't think about it. Once we start to play with different breathing techniques, it's almost like we're starting to welcome different breathing patterns, different ways of playing with breath. It's almost like we go a layer deeper into our own body. Similar to movement, if you're someone who likes to move and you try different expressions of movement, whether it's yoga, Pilates, dance, the gym, a sport, you start to notice your body in different ways. You start to take the box from the ground with a different alignment. You start to take heavy things with more awareness in your body, because you are now more aware of your body, and now you have more you kind of like your range has opened up, and you're more aware of efficiency of movement. And now because you have more patterns of movement within yourself. So the same way that our movement patterns can expand with movement in general, the same way that our breathing patterns can expand with also introducing new breathing techniques into ourselves. Because a lot of us could breathe more in the belly or in the chest, but breathing with the belly, with awareness in the belly, or breathing through the chest with awareness in the chest, can be efficient for other things as well if we are aware of how to do that.
Right.
So breathing patterns, efficiency of movement, and then, as I mentioned briefly, then we start to become more aware of ourselves, which is going to help us in concentration, is going to help us in meditation, to be more focused, mindfulness. So I would say those are the top benefits for introducing this work in ourselves or in children.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of patterning, because I find that when I am more conscious of taking deeper breaths throughout the day, or if I start my day in a meditation, then I'm more likely to continue that spontaneously through the day. You know what I mean? So it's like you were saying, you're kind of training your body. It's just like you said, when you go to a gym, you notice your body's different, but it's one of those things. Once you bring that awareness, and something lights up in you, and you just do it naturally more often. So even during, as a teacher or a counselor, throughout the day, being able to just take pauses through the day, right? Doesn't have to take a lot of time, but notice like the curiosity and the exploration about how does that feel for you? So so as beginners, right? So beginner folks coming in, where do they start? I feel like breathing has become a little bit like the misconceptions of meditation. Like, how do I meditate? What does that look like? But also with breathing, like what do you recommend for your students at Your Yoga Flow? Where do people start? What are some good breathing exercises that are good to start with?
Yeah. So first of all, Liz, I think it's good to mention that if I were to teach maybe 13 to 14-year-olds to 17-year-olds plus adults, I would keep the introductory techniques very similar. I wouldn't change too much.
Yeah.
If I were to teach children that are maybe between 3 years old and 11 years old or 12 years old, maybe I change it up a little different, or I'll change it up a little bit more, so it's not as similar to what I would do with adults. At the end of the day, is just basically the same techniques. It's just how we verbalize them and how we teach them to the different populations. So I would say that if I were just to teach children, let's say below 10 years old, even 11, 12 years old, if I were to teach them about just awareness in the breath, because we can teach either a specific technique, or we can just tell someone, take a deep breath. and that on its own is a technique, just to tell them, just take a deep breath, just a deep inhale and a deep exhale. And that on its own already, we're asking the person, be aware of your breath. So if I were to talk to children that way, I would say, maybe we'll sit in a circle, and then I would say, okay, so everyone think about their favorite food. And then I'll give them a minute to think about their favorite food. And then I'll start asking for volunteers, or we can go person by person and say, okay, which one is yours? And then they say, my favorite food is pizza. So then I'll ask everyone, okay, so let's all sit nice and tall, and let's imagine that we're smelling pizza. So let's all take a deep inhale, smell pizza, and then exhale. And then what's your favorite food? And then, oh, my favorite food is pasta. Okay, so let's all smell pasta. Inhale, smell pasta. So all the kids are inhaling and smelling pasta, and then exhaling. So that's just a fun way that we can maybe, as children, to start to be aware of their breath.
Right.
And then an adult, as simply as just sit nice and tall, lengthen the spine, stacking shoulders over the pelvis. Feel free to close your eyes or keep your eyes open, and just notice your breath. And just inhale and exhale. And then we can start to add a little layers, like notice the coolness of the air as it comes into the nose. Notice the warmth of the air as it comes out of the nose. Or can you hear the sound of the inhale? Can you hear the sound of the exhale? So those are very simple techniques that anyone can do. And if someone is like, oh, I cannot meditate, I'm not able to focus, that's why we all do it, is so we can eventually get to a place where we might be able to focus. So it's totally fine if your mind wanders and thinks about your groceries, or you're gonna buy in 2 hours. But then just come back to your breath, come back to your inhales and exhales. And then so that's a very simple way that we can teach. And then we can start to also go into, for children, I love the teddy bear breathing, which is sitting or lying down, and we can take let's imagine that this is a teddy bear. And then we hold the teddy bear, and then we can place it on our belly, and then close the eyes, and then inhale into the teddy bear, and then exhale and soften the teddy bear on your belly. Or you can inhale and then just lift your teddy bear, and exhale and lower the teddy bear. So and there's a similar way for adults, which is called yogic breathing, which is inhaling to feel the belly expand, the chest expand, the collarbones expand, and then softening collarbones, chest, belly, and then inhale belly, inhale chest, inhale collarbones, soften collarbones, soften chest, soften belly. So that's also a very nice technique to introduce to children or adults who are beginning to experience their own breath for the first time. Another really fun one is bee breathing, or Brahmari. I usually don't use the Sanskrit for children, but I just call it, fun names. But bee breathing, which is humming, take a deep inhale and exhale. And then that's a great technique that, or there's a great technique that we can do with children and adults as well. The children really get into it because they are now visualizing the bee around them, or that there are bees. So, and lion's breath is a really fun one, because lion's breath, we can take adults out of their comfort zone, and children too. But I think children will really go for this because we make the ugliest face possible, and you have to like stick your tongue, cross your eyes. So I'm just gonna do it. Inhaling, exhale, like you really make a lion face, make it as ugly as possible. Some adults tend to, I think that adults are more inhibited when it comes to that than
Right,
children.
right.
But again, that's making a face, is being silly, is kind of like challenging kids to making the most ugly face that they can make. And how far can you stick your tongue out? How much can you cross your eyes? So you can have fun with it. And yeah, and then I would say another technique that is used a lot is five in, five out. Is sometimes called box breathing or equal breath, and inhaling for 5 and exhaling for 5 counts. Sometimes you can hold the breath, inhale for 5, hold for 5, exhale for 5, hold for 5. And then, with kids also we can use a toy. There is those Hoverman spheres
Yes.
that they're like a frame or like structure that goes small and then they expand.
Yeah.
So we can use it, we can hold it, and we can say inhale for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 1 being the full expansion of the sphere, and then exhale 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So they also visualize the expansion that the chest does as they take a deep inhale and a deep exhale. So I would say that those are a few techniques that I love introducing. Those are the techniques really that I use most of the time, because other than that, it just starts to get more complicated in terms of the breathing techniques that maybe I would use more in adults. But for children, the ones I mentioned, I think are the ones that I use the most.
Right. And I'm thinking about all of these techniques that you're talking about, right? They can also be adapted in the classroom in a creative way. So for example, springtime, if it's garden or spring in your preschool, kindergarten, first grade, what you're talking about, the smelling. So it could be smelling fresh flowers, right? Instead of a food or something, or it could be blowing out a flower, or it could be, you could have a flower that you're taking on your belly instead of the teddy bear, right? So there's lots of different ways that you can be creative with these breathing techniques and relate it to the topic that you're studying. So I love that. Excellent.
For sure. Yeah.
And do you have a story to tell? Because we love stories here. Stories.
Yeah.
Do you have a story to tell about maybe, a situation where it could be an adult too, or a child that you taught a breathing and they came back and told you, or you saw that it made a real difference to their life?
Yeah. So when I was in Vancouver, I taught for a while. I was teaching in schools. I was teaching yoga. I would just go, to teach a session at a school. And I remember, I think it was grade 6. And the horrible thing, I think is horrible. In Vancouver, the east side of Vancouver, is known as maybe children having less opportunities than children that live on the west side of the city. It is a generalization of the city, but it is a stereotype that's still there, and that sometimes one can see. So there is a bit of a division between the east side and the west side of the city. And once I went to teach grade 6 on the east side, and it was a specific group of kids that were very, their attention, they didn't have a lot of, they couldn't stay focused for a long time.
Right.
And it was my first time teaching them, and I was struggling, to be honest. I was teaching the class and I was like, okay, these kids are not going anywhere. The class was just extra messy than usual. And I just had to continue reminding them to kind of like stay with me, to stay with me, to stay with me in the class, to listen to what I was saying. And I was trying a lot of different things, and I was very frustrated by the end of it. But it was normal. That was the way that all the teachers of these kids felt that same way every day.
Mm.
And it was my first time. I think I taught a few other sessions there, but the teachers there, that was their normal. Trying to teach these kids. So I remember that when I taught my first class, and then after struggling for half an hour or so, and then once we all came into Shavasana, a lot of them fell asleep. And it was like, and it's funny because in yoga, we're like, oh, try not to fall asleep, Shavasana is so we can start to be mindful and to notice where we are and to still be aware of our bodies. But I was so happy that they fell asleep, not because I was struggling, but because probably these kids needed that.
Yeah.
And they were having difficulties finding that. Maybe they have difficulties finding relaxation on a daily basis. Yeah. So even though I felt like this class was a struggle, I felt that at the end of it, it was all worth it.
Yeah.
And not that all of them fell asleep, but a few of them did. And then even the ones that didn't fall asleep, once we came out of Shavasana, you could feel the energy had shifted in the room. And and they had a bit of like a sleepy face. And that, to me, even though they didn't, I don't remember if they gave me feedback, to be honest, but just the feeling of, oh wow, like these kids were able to have a time in their day that they were able to relax. I don't know what is, what's happening in their homes. We don't know why kids do what they do, but maybe their parents work a lot. Maybe they don't have a lot of time for them. So it was just wonderful to be able to notice someone who struggle being focused, and then they fall asleep right away because someone gave them the permission to fall asleep, basically. So I think that was one of the moments that I remember that was very valuable to me.
Yeah, I love that. I have a 6th grader, so I can completely relate. And what I find interesting too is that I want to, speak to that. There was something about you, and since we've connected, I just think you've got the most incredible, great, calming energy. There's something about you and I. Not only are we from the same place and we have some similarities, but you do have this calming energy. And so you, as a teacher, were coming in there in a difficult situation, and you held the space. That is the beauty of being a yoga mindfulness teacher, right? Or any teacher, is to be calm and organize ourselves in the midst of chaos. And so you created that container for those children to be, and you were essentially co-regulating, right? You were co-regulating for them. You're providing them, even more so now. Children aren't able to as much turn inward, and we're not outside as much. They don't have that co-regulation with nature like when we were growing up. I grew up in British Columbia, surrounded by those incredible trees, right? And that was my life. But we don't have that so much anymore. So for you to hold that space, right, for them, and then for them to be able to let go, that just speaks volumes, right? And so often we hear that in our community too. People say, I'm doing this work and I'm not sure, and I'm going to this class and this is going on. And then you have those moments, right? You have those miracle moments. It's like a surfer who does like 100 waves, right? And then they get that wave. And then as soon as you hit that wave, it's like addiction. You have to go back and back, right? And so one of those, and also as a yoga teacher or a yoga participant, when we go to yoga classes and we have that moment too for ourselves in Shavasana, we want everybody to practice yoga. We want the children to practice yoga because we wish that we had that when we were growing up, right? So what a beautiful story. I think it's not only about the experience of Shavasana, but it really speaks to you as a teacher holding that space. So thank you for sharing that. It's just beautiful. I love
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
Yeah, love
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. So tell us where we can find you. If people are interested in taking this anatomy of breath or taking any other courses with your yoga flow, how do we find you?
Yeah, so youryogaflow.com, or in Instagram or Facebook, Your Yoga Flow. And we have online classes, but we also have trainings for not necessarily people that want to be teachers, but also people that want to know more.
Mm.
But we call them teacher trainings. And then we have all sorts of different levels of teacher trainings there, including a children's yoga teacher training. And we also have an anatomy of breath. It's about a 15-hour course, anatomy of breath. Course, the children's is about 95 hours. And then I also have my own online yoga Patreon page, which is called Life of Movement. So it's patreon.com/Life of Movement. And something that I'm slowly kind of like doing a little bit more of, that I'm not rushing to doing more, is somatic movement. Just because somatic movement is broader and can be applied to many different things, including yoga. And a lot of the time can look a lot like dance. So I'm slowly trying to bring somatic movement into the online class world, because I usually just teach classes, with people in a studio, but I think I'm slowly wanting to do more of that online as well. So there is not a lot of it yet, but I'm slowly doing that more of too, because it really incorporates movement in a more freedom kind of way, with mindfulness, with focusing exercises, with meditation, with breath. So it's kind of like a combination of many different things.
Love it. It's perfect fit for you. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cannot wait
Giselle.
to
It's
share
so
this
wonderful
with our community. Thanks a lot, Juan. See you then.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.